evening, everyone, and welcome to episode 52 of the Retrospectives podcast, our 2020 wrap-up part 2. So, James, how are you going? How was your New Year's? I mean, I saw you, of course. Have you fully recovered from your hangover?
Oh yeah, I was bright and cheerful the next day, Pat, although I hear you had a bit of a rough morning the night after.
Yeah, mainly lots of sleeping. So, James and I couldn't actually get home as early as we wanted because we checked the Uber prices at 12:30 and they were roughly, I think it was $155 for the trip home. So we decided to wait a couple of hours till that had dropped rather dramatically, and we could get home at a cheaper.
We were wearing out our welcome there, so sorry to our very gracious hosts of New Year's. I hope we weren't too much of a bother.
But yeah, no, I was okay. Polished off most of half of a whiskey bottle, but yeah, had a good sleep the next day, and it was mostly okay.
I remember getting into an argument with a couple of people, and then once the argument was over, like the party seemed to have ended like hours ago, and I was just sitting in the middle of the room with the guy. So I don't know where that time went. Sounds like just the usual fare though.
The problem is always, James, that you and I get in these big arguments at parties, but now, since the podcast, we can actually have those arguments online, on air for the greater community to enjoy, rather than being shunned by a friend group. So I think it was a good move for us to start doing this podcast. James and I are, of course, the Retrospectives podcast each and every fortnight. What we normally do is play a classic or niche game of the past from start through to finish, and then have a deep dive review and discussion of it. This fortnight, since we're at the end of 2020, beginning of 2021, and we're at the end of season 2 of our show, we want to do a wrap-up. What we did last year was we did like a Game of the Year episode where we went over all the different games we'd played and we ranked them in terms of what did best in each category, best music, best graphics, etc. This time we're going to do something a bit different. The only concern with that Game of the Year structure is that it can be a bit long, drawn out, and there's a lot of redundancy and repeating ourselves and reiterating ourselves. And we think that while it was valuable last year, it ended up being a bit dry. So what we're doing this time round is, instead of talking about what games do what best in this specific category, James and I have each selected 3 substantive discussion points, ideas that have arisen from multiple episodes or games, or tangents that we weren't able to fully explore on the specific episodes, and we want to have a discussion about these things today. So that's what this episode is. It's substantial discussion about video game ideas, using examples and related to many of the games we've played over the past year and other more modern games where it's relevant.
Yeah, we might sneak in a few little best-ofs from this year too. I'm kind of curious to see what you liked the most out of the games we played this year, Pat, because for me, I don't think there were too many that stood out compared to year one as standout titles.
Yeah, this year was certainly a more stable experience, whereas last year I felt that like that needle was waving all over the place.
Yeah.
There were 1 or 2 standout good and bad games, but we played, I think the average quality was much higher. But like James said, we'll have a quick wrap-up right at the very end where we quickly summarize maybe the top 1 or 2 games that we played this year. But for now, let's get stuck into the discussion.
All right, Pat, so where do you want to take us?
So the first point I would like to talk about is this idea that the experience of playing a game for the first time as you learn it is fundamentally different from the experience of playing a game that you're familiar with and that you understand deeply.
Getting some Dark Souls vibes here. I don't know why that is, but I think that's the only game you've played before.
Well, Dark Souls is definitely playing Dark Souls at the end of this season is a thing that made me, I guess, start reflecting deeply upon this difference. But the game that really kicked it off is a game that we played right at the start of the season, and that game is Heroes of Might and Magic 3. So Heroes of Might and Magic 3 is a game that's almost universally beloved. Everyone loves Heroes of Might and Magic 3, and not many people have many bad things to say about it. And in fact, James and I both highly recommended it. We both think it's a very good game. However, our one substantial point of criticism, or at least one of my substantial point of criticism, is something that I didn't see a lot when people were talking about Heroes of Might and Magic 3, which is what the learning experience is, what the learning curve of this game is. And the fact is, HOM 3's learning curve and learning experience is both brutal and poor game design. When you play Heroes of Might and Magic 3, the only way to gauge army strength is to ram your army into the other guy's army and hope it works out. The only way to know what building whether you should build one building or another building when you have 20 options from the first mission is to just build one and hope that everything works out. And it's the same with unit production. There's a lot of guesswork in those first, I'd say, at least 5 hours and probably closer to 10 hours that you spend learning the game. But once you have a grasp on the fundamental game mechanics and you can start engaging in the strategy in a meaningful way, then all of a sudden you start to see why the game is as highly regarded as it is. So I wanted to see what you thought, James. Do you think that when we talk about video games, it is critical that we make this distinction for all games? Do you think it's something that we need to keep in mind for certain games, or am I making a bigger deal of it than it really exists?
It's hard for me to tell because for the majority of the games that we review, we're doing so as people who have played the game for the first time, and obviously there's a few exceptions. One of the things that we've noticed from people who we've spoken to who listen to our show is that most people start listening to our show, listening to episodes from games that they've played already. Which means that I think that for the first-time listeners, maybe our opinions are going to feel a bit, disconnected to what their feelings are. Whereas I think that of somebody who's listened to, a few episodes and then are starting to pick and choose from our catalog for things they're interested in, our opinions, I guess, on the game is going to match up with their, first experience as well, right?
That's a good way to put it. I think what it comes down to is that the opinion of the critic is almost always going to be fundamentally different from the opinion of the fan.
Yeah.
Like, if there's something that you have played a lot and are super familiar with, you're just in a different sort of position of understanding than you are of a person who's only played it through once. And I just think that there are some games that, I guess, ramp up that understanding curve better. Like, as much as I hate to admit it, I think Vagrant Story, which we did in Season 1, does a better job ramping up the complexity and difficulty of its encounters than Heroes of Might and Magic 3 does. Like, I think that what you need to do... Like, the thing is, the nature of our show, because we mainly do short games that can be reasonably completed in a fortnight, we often do games that aren't as complicated as something like Heroes of Might and Magic 3, so that there aren't an endless source of comparisons. But I think Vagrant Story is definitely a valid one. That game is complicated as hell, but it doesn't dump everything on you at once. It gives you a very limited set of tools, and then it gradually expands upon them. And I just wonder if Heroes could have really scaled back those early missions to have smaller encounters with smaller forces, controlling less heroes, having simpler objectives, and then gradually build up, instead of just having like this. On mission 2, you start the game with like 4 heroes. Like, it's just crazy.
So I think with the experience of learning and getting better at something, I think that, and we identified this in the Hitman episode specifically, I think there's, roughly 3 stages to the learning process, which is information gathering, putting together a plan, and refinement and execution. So for example, and 2 games that are easy to show this kind of learning curve against are both Dark Souls and Hitman, right? When you fight a Dark Souls boss for the first time, you kind of go in, you bash your head against it, you get in there, you try to see each of its attack patterns and memorize them, and then, once you've got all the information, you can go, okay, I need to put together a plan of how I'm going to beat that boss. And oftentimes that's as simple as saying, I'm just not going to get hit. But, even if you've got that plan, you know that he uses this attack and you need to dodge it in this way, that doesn't mean you're good enough to do it. You've got to refine your technique until you can do it. So once you've gotten the information, you've put together the plan to beat it, and you've gotten it good enough to enact that plan, then your learning has kind of gotten there. With Heroes of Might and Magic 3, I think that one of the issues with the learning curve is that each map is quite long. Like, I'm talking like 1 to 2 hours per level, potentially. So if you royally fuck up a mission, you kind of have to spend, another hour trying to put together a plan and use that information that you've gotten. And it can be kind of frustrating. I think the price of failure in this kind of game is a lot higher for there to not be, a lot of smaller, simple levels to begin with. And there were some, but I think that there could have been a much gradualer curve to kind of, fit in naturally with the way people learn to play games.
See, I kind of view it in terms of you're incompetent, then you reach a stage of competence, and then you have mastery. And I think what Heroes 3 offers is extremely difficult to reach mastery. It's a very complicated game, obviously. So I think Heroes 3 is enjoyable from the moment that you get a basic grasp of its systems, and then you keep playing it, it's enjoyable the whole time. But yeah, until you got a basic grasp, it's not enjoyable at all.
And this kind of leads me into one of the points I was going to bring up, which is the idea of games that are kind of like work, games that are kind of like, for fun, and purely like for play experiences. And I think that as somebody who's struggling to get good at a game, that kind of feels like, work. You're putting in effort to get better at something. Whereas, Patrick, for example, will come home after a day and, play Counter-Strike or something he's played 1,000 times before in order to relax, right? When you're tired and you want to have some fun after work, you usually gravitate towards games you're really comfortable with, because generally you've got, not only a bias towards these games, but the ease in which you can play them with your brain half turned off makes them a lot more relaxing.
So let me begin by disagreeing with that premise. I think that any time I'm voluntarily playing a video game, that it doesn't feel like work. Can you elaborate on what you mean by that? Because games, I play all games, whether they're complicated or not, to relax. Even if they're incredibly hard to understand, it's still on some level a relaxing thing.
Something that I noticed a lot when talking to people, and this might just be anecdotal evidence on my half, obviously, is that like lots of players who work long hours often gravitate to, silly for fun games where you don't have to put a lot of effort in to beat. And a lot of people who are often unemployed, I actually have quite a few unemployed friends, really gravitate towards these like very time-consuming, almost work-style games like World of Warcraft and things where you have to put in, dozens and dozens and dozens of hours doing tedious, busy work in order to, progress your character, right? So I feel like, humans in general need to have this good work-life balance, and I think different games can kind of fill the gaps in for you if you're playing the right things, depending on your schedule.
Okay, I can accept that there are people who are unemployed who play specific kinds of video games for work, but I don't think it necessarily works the other direction. I don't think, therefore, that anyone who plays complex or difficult to understand or challenging video games is seeking out work. I think that plenty of people relax with things that take, like, some people relax by going to the gym and getting exhausted, and that's actively relaxing for them. And certainly there are plenty of games I've played where I've come home from work and I'm tired, but I've still got stuck into a, like a game like Dota 2, which is a very complicated, difficult game.
I'm not saying that these games aren't complex, but I more mean that as you get more familiar with a game, I think it becomes a lot easier to dive into, right? I find even though Dota's hard, I still play a lot of it after work when I'm tired. I'm not saying that, for play games are like these silly, super easy games. I more mean that experiences that you're familiar with ultimately like more enticing and more
Sure.
relaxing than when you're playing a game and you don't quite know what to expect. There's like this sense of tension there, right? You're not comfortable or familiar with it.
No, okay, so that is a fair point because there's definitely been times where I've like got a new game or I've needed to start a new game for the podcast and I've been like,
You procrastinate by playing something you're more familiar with, right?
well, yeah, like I got something, I think it was Dragon Age 3 Inquisition, and the game started, and there's just the map opens, and there's a million things going on, and there's so much happening, and it's like, I don't want to deal with understanding everything that's going on this game, like when I've only got 45 minutes before I reasonably need to go to bed. So I get it in that sense. I'm just saying that I don't mind something challenging as a way to relax. Like most people wouldn't consider the process of repeating a boss 35 times in a row necessarily the most relaxing thing in the world, but that's what's fun for me. So yeah, I just think you need to be careful not to conflate complexity with work or challenge with work. I can see how someone who doesn't work would seek out something to fulfill that void in other ways.
Oftentimes, and you see this online a lot, right? When games get updated quite regularly, the people are always talking about like the glory days of their game when really, the game's progressed a lot in the past few months and they're no longer familiar with it and they miss that feeling of familiarity with the game, right? There are people I know online who've been playing like a lot of the older Dota patches because that's what they remember as being fun. I know a lot of people, I think a lot of people play the older editions of Counter-Strike, right? Not everybody jumped into Go. There are still 1.6 servers.
1.6 is still kind of alive. 1.6 held on for a very long time because Counter-Strike Source had a lot of problems as a video game that they gradually fixed over the years. And even when CS:GO first released, it had significant problems that they gradually got on top of. But I would say in this day and age, pretty much everyone just plays CS:GO. But yeah, it took a long way to get there. I will counter what you're saying by saying that sometimes nostalgia actually has. It's not just nostalgia. Overwatch comes to mind. I don't know where that game is at the moment because I haven't played it in a long time. But the game certainly got worse, in my opinion, from what that game used to be. Overwatch, when it was first released, was very much a hybrid between a first-person shooter and a MOBA. 100% it was a hybrid. But as time went on, it increasingly shifted to the MOBA side until there was an extended meta where the FPS element of the game was basically completely eliminated for 7 months straight. So if you're in a meta like that, if you're in a situation like that, sometimes the complaints about the past metas can be completely valid and legitimate.
Yeah, I mean, that's fair enough. I think that, I think it's a combination of things, right? And I think a lot of games. I think World of Warcraft Classic is the perfect example of this. I think that lots of people remembered that game as being something a bit different than it was. I don't think the game was able to recapture that same feeling for a lot of people for an extended period of time. I believe all of the end game content got destroyed quite soon after release, and I think that the online community is just. It's not the way it was back then. I don't think it's done a good job of recapturing that spirit that people were after.
But the thing is, James, it can't. I wrote an article about this, Daisy or the Unexpected Virtue of Ignorance. You should check it out on our website. But the gist of it is that the reason World of Warcraft and, a game like Daisy was so magical and we remember it so fondly is because back when people were playing these games, they didn't understand them. They didn't think about them in terms of how they think about MMOs today. If you're a good MMO player today, you've downloaded 6 mods for your screen and you've got optimal questing routes and you've got all this other stuff. But when people played WoW back in the day, it was an adventure in a world. And that's all it was to a lot of people who were playing their first MMO for their first time ever. You can't recapture that. It's literally impossible. And just creating WoW Classic, just creating that game isn't going to recreate the experience, because the people who are playing the game have just changed fundamentally in how they perceive those kinds of games. So I completely agree with you. WoW Classic was kind of doomed to failure from the very start.
Yeah, and it's kind of funny to link back to our, overarching point. I think these games are a perfect case of where the experience while learning is actually better than the post-learning experience. I think that these games are more fun when you don't know what the reality of them is, right? Like when everything's this fun playground, and then once you've learned, some of that magic disappears, right? I see a lot of people.
Yes.
I see that happen to a lot of people playing a lot of card games where, kitchen table magic is an absolute delight for them. And once everything becomes a bit more serious, that kind of drops away from them. People are no longer playing their silly, wacky decks. Everybody's playing, the ones they found online that are good and are going to get results. And that kind of, playing a different deck every game just disappears.
I would say the only other thing I'd add to that is that it's not just one person being ignorant. They need to be ignorant as part of a community. Because if you've never played an MMO before, but you're playing your first MMO and all your friends are familiar with MMOs and how they work, you are not going to get that fantastical, magical experience. Because when you ask for help, your friends are going to explain it to you in kind of like a mechanical, dry way, to get you to rush to the end game to where the real game is.
Yeah.
Or the same thing with Magic or DayZ. The way you can't really interact with these games by yourself, or at least it's very hard to nowadays. So you need kind of like a shared ignorance amongst the community to kind of get that effect.
Yeah.
It's something that's very hard to achieve in today's day and age.
Yeah, that value, you kind of burn it as you use it, right? Like, as you get better,
Yes.
you can never have that experience of learning ever again with that game. And so, it's sad in some ways, because a lot of times you do have these, really incredible memories with your friends playing these new games for the first time. I remember playing Heroes of New Earth and Dota for the first time with my friends and not having any idea of what was going on. But we still had a good time, and, we sat there being bad and getting flamed by our teammates and flaming them ourselves. That experience is somewhat still going strong today, but that initial learning curve is gone forever for me, and it is for many people. But memories are good.
Yeah, I mean, what I'd say to anyone who misses that is you really need to just keep your eyes peeled for any games that are weird.
Yeah.
Because when DayZ first came out, no one had any fucking idea what was going on with that game. Like, you'd read weird articles about it, and videos would pop up on YouTube about people being robbed, and you couldn't understand it and you were confused. So if ever, and I mean, it's going to happen again, there's going to be another video game that pops up and everyone will be like, what the fuck is this? And not understanding, and you'll need to do registry edits and install weird mods to get working. If you see a game like that, get involved with it, because it really is a very unique experience being involved in the community when no one has any fucking idea what the game it is you're playing. So yeah, I say that to everyone. Keep an eye out, because you won't regret the experience of like learning a game alongside everyone else. It's really, really a wonderful one.
Yeah, another specific example I wanted to bring up in terms of this idea of the learning versus, being learned kind of gap There was recently a big controversy on all of the Call of Duty subreddits and forums about the introduction of skill-based matchmaking, which Patrick, I think you'll be familiar with.
Oh my god. I'm sorry, I'll let you finish. I have
Go.
opinions
Do you
about
want?
this.
Do you want to talk about it? Because I think probably know about it more than I do.
Okay. I'm not sure about your point, but I'll just explain this idea and then you can bounce off me. So basically, on the Call of Duty subreddit, and it seems to be most of the people in the Call of Duty community, I'm not sure 100% what the number is, but at the very least, on all of the COD subreddits, they fucking hate skill-based matchmaking. Like, they loathe it. They do not, a lot of these Call of Duty players do not want to be put into a server with players of similar skill to them, because I think the way their logic works is that when they're put in a server with good people, they have to try hard to win instead of picking stupid weapons and running around killing new players. Now, I think this is one of the most fucking retarded points of view that I've ever heard in my entire life. Skill-based matchmaking should exist for literally every single competitive game, because it means that no matter what skill level you are, you can have an enjoyable time playing the video game because you're playing roughly with people of your same skill level. The only explanation I can think of for not wanting it when you don't want to try hard is so that you can stomp new players, which is a terrible thing to want to do, because if you're stomping new players, then a new player who is completely out of their league is getting crushed and they feel horrible. Sorry, that's my rant about COD players. COD players are retarded. Skill-based matchmaking is essential.
No, I broadly agree with you, but I thought it was interesting in terms of this discussion, because say in COD with skill-based matchmaking, theoretically, you are never going to progress from that stage of learning to having learnt the game, right? You're always moving up in challenge, but you're moving up and being, matched against harder and harder players, so you're constantly being forced to improve, right? There's never this point where it tapers off and suddenly you can play and relax and, just destroy everybody because, you've conquered the game, you've become a god amongst men. And I think that experience is kind of what they're talking about. What they want to get from the game is this, post-learning fun. But, obviously, like you said, it's kind of selfish to want to do that, and kind of ridiculous. I don't think it's sustainable at all. But, with this in mind, you can kind of see what they're after, right?
Yeah, I can understand the desire to stomp noobs because it feels great when you go 30 kills and 2 deaths. Like, I get that. But to me, I would rather go 30-6 against other good players. So I would rather earn my victory by playing well against other good people than I would. Because the thing is, James, I'm already better than those players. The people I'd go 30-2 against, like, I've got nothing to prove to them. If we play 100 times, I'm always going to go 30-2 against them. In fact, maybe I'm unusual in this, but if I had a choice every time I play Call of Duty to be matched against pro players, like the best players, I would snap that up instantly, and that is all I would do. I would play so much Call of Duty if I could be matched with other good players 100% of the time, because that experience would force me to improve as a player so much faster, and I'd have such a good time, and every time I got a double kill, it would feel amazing, because the value of a double kill against pro players is worth 100 times as much as going 30-2 against new players.
Well, that's interesting to me because, really, if a pro player was getting matched in your game, they'd be getting this thing that they're arguing for, right? I think it would be fair if there was an opt-in queue where lesser skilled players could opt in to get matched with higher skilled players, right? Then there's nobody getting stomped unawares, like they fully know what they're queuing into. And obviously there's issues with splitting the player base, but I don't see any issue with that. Because you just put yourself in the shoes of the less skilled player, right? Getting matched against these stomping pros.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the thing is I'm kind of arrogant and think I'd be able to raise to meet the challenge. But if you're playing there are online chess challenges you can do that everyone enters, right? So you can have grandmasters playing against 1,200 players. But as the league goes on, it matches winning players against other winning players. Towards the end of the league, if you're the grandmaster and you've won 80% of your games, you're not playing against 1,200s towards the end. So even like a 2-hour league in chess, which has a thing with the best players and the worst, it's still rapidly changing the skill brackets. I just don't like the idea of having that much variance in the skill differentials, because there's going to be a point where the skill gap is so large that it's actually impossible for the new player to do anything. I wouldn't mind, maybe a compromise would be to widen the skill range instead of having it as tight as it is. But I would argue that there's, plenty of natural variance within playing players of roughly the same skill level as you anyway.
Yes, I agree with you that these new players should definitely not be getting stomped constantly, and that these more advanced players need to suck it up, as it were. Pat, where did you want to go from here?
Well, I've got another point, but James, what about we have a quick music break?
A music break? We don't even have any music to play. There's no music left.
Yeah, James, what about, last time I just picked some random tracks, so you can pick some random tracks, or you could pick a track from one of the games that we've played this year that you didn't pick for the episode.
Yeah, sure. All right. Well, I'm going to pick a song, and I'll edit in. Yeah, no. All right, so I'll pick a song from the game that had the best music of any game we played this year, and that was dun dun dun.
System Shock.
No, no. It was not System Shock. It was Katamari Damacy, and I don't think it was particularly close either. Although there were a couple of good tracks from Earthworm Jim and Luna here and there. But my favourite soundtrack of the games we did this year was easily Katamari. It's very tonally consistent for a game going for its own very distinct and bizarre tone. So love to share some more of it with you guys.
I know you love me. I wanna word you up into my life. Let's roll up to be a single star in the sky. I hear you calling me. I wanna word you up into my life. Let's lop up to make a single star in the sky. To you.
That was more wonderful music from Katamari Damacy. Patrick, did you have a particular... Actually, maybe we'll save that for later. You can tell us which episode you think had the best music.
Unfortunately, I have to agree with you that Katamari Damacy had the best. However, in the interest of diversity, I'll find another track for us to play later on the episode. Yeah, and once again, I need to veto Dark Souls from any discussion of best of, or it's just going to be the Dark Souls episode part 2, which we need to avoid for now. So yeah, I'll have a think about what track I want to do, but it'll be a non-Katamari Damacy one.
Yeah, so moving on then, I wanted to jump into a discussion about quality of life features in games. Because,
Hmm.
because on this show, we review these older titles from the perspective as people who are new, who are checking out these old titles to see what all the fuss is about. We're not going in with all this nostalgia that I think, a lot of other retro review shows kind of come up from. Lots of them are started because, the person doing the reviews just loves these old games they're reviewing, but that is not really the case for us. And, as the kind of person who doesn't have a huge amount of nostalgia for a lot of these old titles, I think that quality of life features are the things that have been most consistently missing from the games that we've gone back into play. Oftentimes, there's been problems with save systems and weird controls, inventory management, lack of accessibility options, unskippable cutscenes, no fast travel, that kind of thing. And it can really surprisingly mar an experience. How have you been feeling the burn of the lack of quality of life?
Well, it's interesting with all the things you mentioned. I think a lot of the things that are identified as being quality of life improvements aren't necessarily as simple as being a strict improvement. I would say that a lot of these things are differences or changes in game design. And the example I would cite is probably something like, I know you weren't fond of the game, but if we just talk about it in a mechanical sense, something like System Shock. So in System Shock, you're given objectives, but those objectives are derived from audio logs and notes you find around the place. You don't have a quest log where everything is neatly recorded for you, as in you have to do this thing now. And you have to go to this location and a quest marker pops up for you to follow. And I think that if System Shock was a video game that was made today, maybe not today. Let's say a game that was made 10 years ago with the design sensibilities of that era, there would be a quest log that neatly tracked everything you wanted, and there would be a quest marker that you could follow all the curves in the hallways so you didn't get lost. But the absence of these things goes a long way to creating a sense of atmosphere and forces you to pay attention to the world in a way that a lot of modern games don't make you do. And that experience is one that I treasure when I was being spoon-fed so many games before. Now, System Shock is frustratingly annoying at multiple points with this system. There's at one point you need to find, like, I can't remember, it's like a specific engineering part, and you unlock a panel which unlocks it in another random place. It's ridiculous. I had to look up a walkthrough. So I'm not saying like every game should be like System Shock or that System Shock is perfect. I'm just saying that quality of life is kind of... I think sometimes the quality of life overall can sometimes be even better when it's lacking these features.
Yeah, so I agree with what you're saying, that not all quality of life features are necessarily quality of life features because they directly impact the game. I'm more talking about things like, for example, when we played Super Mario World, each level had a pseudo checkpoint in the middle of the level. And once you hit the checkpoint, if you died, you'd be spit out to the main menu. But then when you went back into the level, you'd like spawn at that checkpoint. There's basically like no difference for having you spawn at the checkpoint when you die. It's just like a bit of quality of life that's missing, right?
Yeah, no, don't get me wrong. I think that I agree with you that one of the things that distinguishes the old games from the new is how is that these old games just have so many time-wasting mechanisms and little annoyances that really piss me off. Like, the way you interact with the inventory in Thief 2 is very annoying. You have to keep touching the bracket keys to change one inventory item at a time, instead of, equipping specific items of your choice from your inventory on the keys, if that's what you wanted to do. You have to just keep going tap, 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 tap,
Oh,
tap,
I
tap,
just
tap.
rebound it to the scroll wheel.
Oh, sure, or whatever. Rebound to the scroll rule. Whereas I'd want to bring up a specific thing with a key press.
Yeah, and like there are things in the inventory that just don't make sense to be in there, like your gold. Like, why can't that just be on the heads-up display or in a separate menu? Why do I have to scroll past it? I can't like use it as a puzzle, solution or throw it at people. There are a lot of weird things Thief did in its inventory. I think Thief and System Shock's inventories in particular were a bit annoying at times, to put it mildly.
I just really want to hammer on the fact that sometimes these things are intentional. Like, I think one of the great things that Dark Souls did was that you cannot fast travel at all until you reach the midway point of the game. And what that forces you to do is it forces you to kind of backtrack through its world and understand how it all fits and connects together. And it makes the journeys, particularly the journey down into Blighttown and out again, very, I don't know, I think it's one of the most special moments in gaming that I've had having to overcome that challenge. But all of the other From Software games have just let you teleport immediately. And so those worlds feel nowhere near as interconnected as Dark Souls. Because once you go through an area, it's very possible you'll literally never go there again. So sometimes things which are an annoyance for the player in terms of quality of life can be good. As long as there's intention behind it. And there's a reason for it.
Yeah, in Celeste, a platformer both Patrick and I have played, the designers put in a lot of little tweaks to make it feel better to play. For example, if you jump on the same frame as you hit a spike within a pixel of accuracy, the game will pretend you didn't hit the spike and let you jump anyway. Same with falling off the bottom of the screen, because the game tries to play to your intent rather than the pixel perfect accuracy of what it's trying to do. And what that means is that oftentimes it just feels really good to play, and there's never any of these moments where you're like, damn, I totally hit the button at the right time, I'm sure I did it, which I had a few times playing, Super Mario World, and a couple of other platformers we've done. I think that as games have gotten older and as designs become more sophisticated, people have started putting focuses on making sure people are having good experiences, rather than just designing a challenging game.
Yeah, and it's not like Celeste isn't balls to the walls hard either.
Yeah.
It's like it's an easy game. It just gave a bunch of tricks for speedrunners who can now, if they get it frame perfect and pixel perfect, can just jump up walls of spikes, no problems.
Yeah.
Celeste speedruns are
pretty nutty. Yeah, it's pretty funny.
Watch. Yeah. But yeah, it's quite funny, all those little tricks. There's a really cool Twitter thread on it that just explains all the little bbits and pieces they did to get that feel. It's just opened it up for so much abuse from speedrunners, so thank God for that. Super Mario Maker has a problem where the hitboxes on the spikes and piranha plants feels awful because it's like a square box, but the spikes and piranha plants as objects aren't square boxes. So basically, if you just hit anywhere within that box, it just instantly kills you. It's very frustrating.
Yeah.
Whereas Celeste does a much better job communicating, I guess, the boundaries of the thing that might kill you.
And, I think, the most notable frustration we've had on the show is controls a lot of the time. I think when we started the show, Patrick, you weren't much of a controller user. You'd played Dark Souls on a controller, but you are the mouse and keyboard representative himself, right?
Yeah, I mean, this is kind of linking into what I was saying about the difference between mouse and keyboard controls and controller controls. So I guess we can just talk about that here, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so absolutely. And in fact, I was going to make the argument that I would say in like 95% of cases, a mouse and keyboard is objectively the superior control scheme.
Yeah, I disagree strongly. I think there are definitely... So actually, let's go into specifics. Let's talk about what we think each control scheme is good for. And I want to specifically point out thumbsticks here as being far superior to mouse and keyboard in one key area, right? And that is in having, a full range of motion with a continuous input, right? So with, walking around in a 3D action game, you could control it with a mouse and keyboard. You can move left, right, forward and back with WAS and D, but you have less control than you would with an analog input device, right?
Completely agree. That is the one of the big scenarios that I've acknowledged as it being superior.
So theoretically, a mouse is an analog input device, right?
Yes.
But how bad would it feel to move forward, back, left, and right using a mouse, right? Because you could.
Well, you don't.
You can't, right? Because you'd move the mouse forward, and then you'd have to keep moving it forward, and then you'd have to pick it up and pull it back. Because the mouse is really good for quick jerky movement, right? But for continuous input, you just can't use it for continuous input, right? Whereas a thumbstick, you can hold in a direction.
I agree. When it comes to controlling a character in third person in a 3D environment, analog stick objectively superior in terms of it giving you a far greater degree of control. Because just on a simple level, if you're using a mouse and if you're using a keyboard, you've got theoretically 8 directions if you include the diagonals, but a controller has 8,000 with all of the with how precise you can be.
I'm even not entirely convinced why thumbstick and mouse hasn't caught on. I think that it would be a great input method for first-person games, being able to, have that full range of movement with that accuracy of your aiming reticule.
Sorry, I'm just trying to understand. So you'd have a...
Yeah, remember when the Wii was out and you had the Wiimote and you had that extra thing connected to it with the thumbstick? Like that, but connected to a mouse.
Okay, I think so. Basically, you'd have your thumb on the thumbstick, and then your 4 fingers would be on buttons underneath or something.
Because that would work fine, right? Assuming that there was buttons and there was or theoretically, if there was a thumbstick popping out under your spacebar on your keyboard.
I'm just thinking through it. I don't think it's ridiculous. I guess the thing that comes to mind as someone who plays first-person shooters is that you can rapidly, you can strafe left and right very rapidly, much easier than a thumbstick, because although a thumbstick gives you greater precision moving in any one particular direction, it will be slower in transferring rapidly between the 4 directions. Because when I've got my hands on WASD, I can pretty much instantly change direction. That's much harder to do on a controller, I think.
Yeah, something that I think was a bit of a controversy for a while in the fighting game community is for a long time many people played with either controllers or a joystick box, right, which was basically an arcade cabinet's joystick and buttons, but in a little box you could have on your lap to play fighting games with. And then this thing called the Hitbox came out, which was basically just playing with a keyboard, right? Instead of a big joystick, there was a second set of buttons, which were the directions, and people were able to execute things much quicker on that because they could, you do a fireball input a lot quicker by just...
Then jerking it back and forth.
Yeah, by just pianoing the keyboard. And many people were arguing that it should be, banned in some competitions. But, because I think, like you're saying, digital inputs can offer a really rapid input as opposed to a thumbstick.
Okay, so James, with that out of the way, and the thing is, I do agree on that point. Can you name any other thing? Okay, so I'll tell you what this. The other point I had in favor of controllers is that a lot of the time it's more comfortable if you want to relax and kind of sit back with your feet up with a controller in your hand than it is to be hunched over a mouse and keyboard.
Yeah, absolutely.
But in terms of I guess how good they are, I think that mouse and keyboard in literally every other area is superior.
Every other area.
Literally, name me any one area where a controller offers a better experience than the one we were just talking about.
Like 3D action movement?
Yeah, 3D third person action movement.
Like
Although
racing games make more sense to me on a controller, but then again, even like
sure.
having a steering wheel there.
No, I agree with racing games. Racing games is another good point, although I guess I'd kind of vaguely group that in with third person controlling a thing.
See, to me, third person controlling a character or a thing is almost like half of video games.
That's so weird that you think of it like that. That's crazy. To me, that's like 5% of video games.
Really? That's really weird. Like the only other, because you've got first person character games and then you've got more abstract kind of games with like RTS and menu based games.
Of the games we played this year...
So Katamari Damacy. Let's go from the top. Katamari Damacy, easy controller game. Yep. Heroes of Might and Magic 3, mouse and keyboard.
Crystalis. May as well be mouse and keyboard.
It could work with either. I think that's pretty even, honestly.
Well, no, but the thing is, you could play it on a controller, or you could... So when it comes to a game like Crystalis, which for people who don't know is like a 2D action RPG, kind of like Zelda.
Top down. Yeah, Zelda's a good comparison.
Yeah, so you could play that on a controller, or you could play it on a keyboard and rebind the keys in whatever configuration you like, instead of being limited to a specific grip by holding a controller.
Yeah, but there is the comfort thing again that you brought up.
Well, yeah.
Right?
So comfort is relevant, but in terms of your ability to play the game accurately and rapidly, I think keyboard wins out in that situation because you just have so many ways to customize it exactly how you want.
I still think it's even, but we'll err towards mouse and keyboard. Okay, Sonic the Hedgehog.
Mouse and keyboard.
Keyboard? Yeah, I can say keyboard. Archimedean Dynasty. Can't even play it with a mouse.
100% keyboard.
Tribes Vengeance, another shooter. Mouse and keyboard. Sly Cooper, easy controller.
Yep.
System Shock, mouse and keyboard. Freelancer. Mouse and
I can't
keyboard,
remember. I think I went mouse and keyboard, yeah. But you could theoretically swap between for the dogfights.
Okay. See, I'm going down, and Splinter Cell is a third-person game.
Yes.
But I think I preferred playing mouse and keyboard for that one.
I mean, I think that you could go either way because of the sneaking speed, but the use of the mouse wheel to control the sneaking speed was a pretty good addition. So that was... I mean, you could go either way, right? Like, it's not really a shooting game. It's a third-person
For stealth games, I do prefer a controller because I can slowly lean on the analog stick.
Let's get to the game that matters.
Kingdom Under Fire, the Crusaders. Yeah. Easy,
mouse and keyboard
easy
for
controller.
Me. Yeah, but if that game was designed with mouse and keyboard,
it would be a completely different game.
It would have been way easier to control.
Yeah, but it'd be a completely different game. Like, I feel like this game was made with the idea that it would be an RTS for controller.
If you could move your squads and they were in control groups on the mini-map, that would be an improvement, right? The fact that they had to deal with the retarded, controller of consoles is not the game's fault. Like, they could have made a better game if they'd done it for computer.
No, but I feel like this game was made with the challenge in mind. Like, I feel like they were like, all right, let's do it. Let's make an RTS for console so we can bust open a new market and sell millions. And it didn't quite work out for them, but I think they did a pretty good job. If Halo Wars
can do it, so can we.
I think this game was designed specifically with a controller in mind. Like, I don't think it would have been made.
Sure. Let me get to the gist of my beef, James, because as long-time listeners of the show will know, I hate consoles and I hate controllers. That's not quite true. I'm exaggerating, but you get the idea. Whereas I'm very much in favor of mouse and keyboard controls. And what I want to bring up, my main discussion point, is that I think UIs have been barbarized and torn to shreds and made significantly worse because they wanted to create video games that were able to be played on a controller.
Actually, I had the opposite in my notes. I had that thanks to glorious consoles, UIs and control inputs became much more intuitive.
Are you being serious?
Yeah, I mean, okay, let's take something like the universal interact button, right? How much better would System Shock be to control if it had something like that? Other than, controlling it like you've got 10 levers and like a rope hanging from the ceiling and steam comes out when you pull it down.
I think that comparison is unfair.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, let me explain why. Because I think that was so early in FPS sort of controls design that the problems weren't because it was designed for PC. The problems were that it was an early PC, it was an early game when they hadn't even come up with what a good control scheme for PC looked like. Let me use a more contemporary example where a game's UI was changed for the sake of consoles. Is that okay?
Sure.
So you're familiar with Morrowind, right? It's not a game I've played a lot of, but you're familiar with what Morrowind's inventory screen looks like.
Yes.
It's like a big grid, right? It's just a big old grid on one side, and when you speak to a merchant, they have a big old grid on their side. You know what that is, James? That is the perfect inventory system.
I think many people who play Diablo-style games would disagree with you.
Okay, hold up. Let me just say it's not the most sophisticated because you don't have different tabs identifying different kinds of gear and stuff. But theoretically, an inventory system that presents you with as much data as possible is glorious. I love it. This Underrail game I've been playing, you just open up your inventory and there's all these tabs, but you can just see everything at once. I love it so much. The inventory system of Oblivion and then Skyrim, games which were more designed for console UIs, want to make me tear my hair out with how little shit you can see at once and the process of binding things to hotkeys, because it was designed for people to press bit by bit instead of rapidly moving their mouse back and forth all over the screen. So my argument is that consoles destroyed the utilitarianism brilliance of PC UIs.
I feel like this example is like an example where a reasonable UI was made and then the same developer made a horrific UI.
I mean, that's also a fair point.
Honestly, I'm not even going to try and argue against this. I think inventory specifically, mouse and keyboard wins, hands down. But this is like, you're taking a game made for mouse and keyboard and then weirdly translating it to another. Whereas, like, if you had a game that was made for controller and then you translated it up, I think you'd have the same kinds of problems. Whereas, especially with analog movement.
Okay, let me talk about a game that defined console shooters and is in fact a game that I like quite a lot. But it's one that represented the change of how FPS games were designed. I'm talking about, of course, Halo 1. You know, Halo 1 popularized the 2-weapon limit. You know why Halo 1 had a 2-weapon limit? Because of fucking controllers. That's why. There aren't enough buttons to have 8 guns on a controller. They hadn't invented the weapon wheel yet.
Yeah, the weapon wheel, which solved that issue. Like, I think you're just counterpointing yourself here, Patrick. I think people being bad at creating controller UIs doesn't mean that good ones can't be made, right?
You know what else is bad about controllers? Auto-aim. And the legitimization of auto-aim as a thing that exists and a thing that should exist.
I mean, I think all first-person games should be played on mouse and keyboard. I won't argue that.
Do you know how mad I was, James, the moment I sat down and tried to play, I think it was like Call of Duty Black Ops on PlayStation for the first time? Oh, man, I was so furious because I saw the option for auto-aim and I turned it off because I'm like, this is a joke. I'm not going to have the game play the game for me. And then I would see the kill cam of someone killing me and I could see the auto-aim. They were holding down the trigger in my general direction and the game was like, oh, you know what, you're close enough, and it pulled that aim reticle to me and it killed me. Oh.
Yeah, so it makes the game more about the fun things about first-person
Oh.
shooters, map awareness and strategy, not
Call
Twitch
of Duty.
skill.
Call of Duty. The point is, and the point I'm trying to get across is that PC UIs and controls are glorious, and I regret the sad times that led us off the path. Luckily, with the revitalization of the indie scene, we're starting to see video games return to the brilliance of PC UIs. But yeah, controller UIs are garbage, and I feel very mad about it.
But playing on the couch is just more enjoyable, like, factually, than sitting in my chair. So I just can't get behind this idea. I feel like I've played more games with a controller than I have with a mouse and keyboard.
Maybe, but you are a degenerate, so that's entirely
okay. I mean, you do only play first-person shooters, so...
and occasionally stealth games. All right, James, time for my music break, right?
Yeah. All right, Patrick, so which game did you enjoy?
So, I think that, like you, looking back on the games, Katamari Damacy absolutely had the best soundtrack. Honestly, I think compared to last year, the soundtrack is a bit of a drop-off, honestly. I think the soundtracks of the games we played last year were overall better. But I guess the game I want to highlight is definitely Super Mario World. I think that game has excellent music. The only other one that really comes close to me is Castlevania, the OG Castlevania, which has
really good tracks, actually.
Yeah, really good tracks. I was really impressed. I'm not normally into that era of digitized music, but it was really good. But got to give it to Super Mario. There's fantastic diversity and has a real sense of fun and adventure with every track. So here is Super Mario World.
There was some more music from Super Mario World, and, like Pat, I agree that I think this year musically wasn't as good as last. I do still think there were some pretty good standouts, like the first level theme of Earthworm Jim and the main theme of No One Lives Forever. I think, there was some really good tracks. Oh, and the second overworld theme for Lunar Silver Star Story, definitely up there for me. So... moving on, Patrick, you had this notion of vulnerability topic that you wanted to talk about.
Oh yeah, absolutely. This is a big one for me. So what I wanted to talk about and ask your opinion of was, as you said, this notion of vulnerability. Because for a very long time, James, I thought that I hated RPG games. And, maybe I still do. But what I figured out is that it's not the idea of a character growing stronger that I dislike. It's that a character grows less vulnerable as a game goes on. Or, I guess, more accurately, grows less vulnerable to the point where they're close to invulnerable. Although there's always a risk. And I've identified games that maintain the vulnerability of that protagonist throughout the duration. It includes, Dark Souls, Super Mario, Thief, Halo, and Diablo 1. Whereas games I'd identify as being boring snooze fests often for your first playthrough are ones where you're not vulnerable. And that's stuff like Super Metroid after about the midway point, when you get enough life upgrades and suit upgrades that reduce damage, that you can kind of just jump through all of the platforming obstacles and take negligible damage. Dawn of War and Hero and Might and Magic 3's late game, where you're just basically mopping up forces. You've basically won the game already, but you're just performing cleanup duty. And Kirby, Nightmare in Dreamland, where the enemies don't pose any real threat to you, so you just kind of steamroll your way through the game. And I think that vulnerability I'm not going to make an absolute statement, but I'm going to say vulnerability is extremely important most of the time in creating an engaging gameplay experience.
It makes a lot of sense to me that the same person is saying this as is the person who said they would prefer to be matched only against pro players than to stomp people in Call of Duty every game. I think you've got a pretty big bias against power fantasy games, Patrick. You don't really, you enjoy being the underdog, right?
So I think power fantasies are enjoyable when they are done for limited periods of time. Without getting too spoilerific, have you played Half-Life 2, James?
A little bit. I played up to the bit with the there was like an airship thing that you like glided along this swamp, and then I quit because it was boring as fuck.
Yeah, worst part of the game. But yeah, so I can't believe I'm going to avoid spoiling Half-Life 2 in the year 2021, but here we go. There's a part of Half-Life 2 where you're given a power fantasy that's incredibly fun, and it lasts for about 30 minutes, and it's right at the end of the game, and it's awesome. But so when applied in very specific doses, power fantasies can be fun. But if that's the substantive nature of your experience, why the hell am I even playing a video game? Like, at that point, I'd rather read a book or watch a movie or anything. Because if my decisions don't matter and I can just steamroll through the game anyway, what's the fucking point? Just give me a visual novel, or let me take my hands off the keyboard and mouse and let the game play itself for me. Because
what, you don't think the perfect game is one where you press a button and it says you win over and over? Like,
but yeah, I mean, you're being sarcastic. But if
no, I'm not. I tend to agree with you. I think that if I'm not challenged, I get bored pretty quickly. The point where I drop a game, or like a deck in a card game or a build in Path of Exile, is when I've been winning for too long and haven't been challenged. If I'm no longer getting challenged, I want my games to be like an ebb and flow where I'm getting, challenged, and then for a little while I'm, way stronger than I need to be, and then for a little while I'm way weaker than I need to be. If there's that kind of like up and down sine wave of, challenge and ease of access, a challenge and power fantasy, then I'm having, that's the key curve that I want it to be nailing down. But it's pretty hard for a lot of, I guess, stats-based games to nail that, especially when there's so many variables in the mix.
I mean, I hate to bang on the drum. I actually love banging on this drum, but Dark Souls does that pretty successfully. Like, what Dark Souls does is that your damage output goes up significantly over the course of the game. But even on New Game Plus or whatever, the torch-wielding Hollow can kill you. Now, you do become stronger. Like, I'm not saying it's literally, you're literally as vulnerable as you are at level 1 as you are at level 50. But if you're not paying attention, pretty much every enemy in the game can kill you. So you're always at least somewhat vulnerable.
This is kind of one of the reasons, and we've argued about this a lot, that I don't like respecs very much in games, because something that I like is when my character has a defined weakness that I need to overcome through play. In a stealth game, usually you're not very strong in melee combat, so you have to avoid getting seen in order to overcome this weakness. And generally, in lots of RPGs with, skill trees and builds, your character has things that they're good against and things that they're not so good against. And when you're, knuckling down and trying to beat one of these, tough opponents that's particularly good against your character, I can find the experience of overcoming that very rewarding Respecs make me feel very uncomfortable because instead of overcoming this vulnerability, you're just kind of manipulating what your character's vulnerable to and shifting that elsewhere. So now you don't really have to overcome your challenges. And I have come down on my opinion on this over the years, and I think that games should have respec options, but I do prefer it when you are kind of forced to face the things that are difficult for you.
Honestly, James, I've also moved away from my opinion of unlimited respecs whenever you feel like it, because the thing is, you do raise a valid point about that. If you could just, particularly for RPGs, if you could literally respec whenever you want, you could be cheating yourself out of overcoming a challenge. I just feel like you should err on the side of respecs, and I like how actually this is something that Dark Souls 2 does really well. I mean, pay attention to this moment. I'm saying something positive about Dark Souls 2. So Dark Souls 1 doesn't have respecs. Dark Souls 3 gives you 5 respecs per New Game Plus cycle if you go to a specific NPC. But Dark Souls 2 ties it to an item, which I think is the best way to do it. There's a super special secret rare item that you find very few of in the game world, and you probably only discover 1 or 2 naturally that gives you a respec. So by giving it to you in very fleeting amounts, I think that it can stop you from getting soft locked, which is possible, like where it's not literally impossible, but it's just miserable to get past a challenge. So if something's not working, you can use it as a recourse without you doing it constantly, literally every fight.
Whereas I felt like a game like Diablo 3, which lets you completely change your abilities between every fight, was kind of not where I wanted to be on that system. I like it when my characters solidify into something. I can attach a story to these characters that I've created because I can, recount their trials and tribulations, how difficult their journey was and what gave them trouble, what was great. When I was playing Dark Souls with my crossbow build and I finally got the triple shot crossbow, that was glorious. And then I realized that, it takes longer to reload, so I still had to, overcome that weakness.
I actually think this is a good link to something we were talking about before, about the experience while learning how to play versus the experience once you understand the game and its systems. And basically, while you are learning how to play a game, when you're playing it for the first time, I want as many respecs as I can, because if I'm allowed to, I'd love to experiment with all these different builds. Divinity Original Sin 2, once you get past Act 1, literally unlimited respecs, as many as you want for completely free. And it's incredibly abusable, like you can maximize thievery and then steal everything and then get rid of your thievery skills. However, what it allows you to do is it lets you just try out new shit. It's like, you know what? I want to try out this character build. Boom, I'm trying out this character build. It's very cool. So while playing that game for the first time, it was really cool just being able to try everything. Once I understand a game back to front and I understand what build I'm going for and I understand where the items are that I want to get along the way, you don't need respecs. And I think that the experience you described of, my character is going to be strong in some fights and weak in others, and I'm going to need to compensate with my ability for those ones, I think that's a very cool thing, and it's something that you won't necessarily have if you can respec at will.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of the ones where it starts off free and slowly gets more expensive to you as you keep using it. So, you get that period of being able to try something out at the start of your playthrough, but eventually you're kind of forced to settle on something as it becomes a bit too costly for you to continue to abuse it. So that's really where I fall into. I kind of like that kind of system where, you do get that degree of freedom at the beginning, but then you are kind of railroaded at the end.
I mean, my only concern with that is that I feel like so many of those ARPG builds, their late game points are informed by their early game points. So it often feels like all one and the same.
With Path of Exile, you actually do a lot of respecking. Like you take things early to make leveling easier, and then you get rid of those points and move them somewhere else.
Okay, sure.
Yeah.
See, I don't really get to the late game of those games because I get bored on the first
Bored?
playthrough. Talking
Yeah.
about vulnerability, ARPGs on your first run through are so fucking boring, man, because there's very little that can realistically challenge you as a character. Like Diablo 2, Ariandel, the poison boss, is a problem, and Diablo is a problem, but that's probably it for the entire first campaign.
Yeah, I've kind of fallen on the genre pretty hard myself because of that exact reason. Like, there's only so much right-clicking in a direction with no resistance that I can do before it gets kind of stale. And, you know, while just the spreadsheeting, making characters and kind of, you know, figuring out what works was fun for a while, you know, eventually you get good at that, and then you gotta spend like 8-10 hours just, you know, face rolling things before you can get to anything that actually challenges you. Although there are people out there who do kind of like that and find it relaxing, but it's not for me anymore. And this conversation came about because of your thoughts when playing Thief 2, right?
Yeah, like I think that Thief 2 and just stealth games in general, but I think Thief 2 is one of the best examples of it, is that your character is not a superhero. Like, they're just a thief. The way when you play the game, you kind of see the world through the eyes of a thief. You see a patch of shadows, and you're like, thank God, and you slink towards it, and you sit there, and you feel safe, just hiding in the shadows. So you're very, very, very good at being sneaky and picking locks and hiding in shadows, but you never want to get into a one-on-one fight with a single guard because you're vulnerable.
Yeah.
And it's kind of interesting that a game that has, by making you so obviously vulnerable in direct fights, it incentivizes you to play and role play in a very particular way. You know, you're very strong in a specific way, and you're very weak in a specific way, and it leads to a better experience, I think, overall than even something like Dishonored, which by the end of the game, it's basically a superhero simulator instead of being a stealth game.
And I think that being vulnerable, like, in terms of your ability as a character and feeling vulnerable, are different things, but I think they both contribute to an overall engaging gameplay experience. Like, I think Dark Souls does it well by having the penalty for failure be quite high, like you're sent back to a checkpoint a while away and you lose all your stuff. I think that having consequence to your actions can really, you know, go a long way to make the world feel weighty and your actions to feel weighty. Like, for example, if I gave you a challenge, Patrick, and said that sometime within the next week, you have to do a load of washing, right? Something trivially easy to complete. But if you fail to do this load of washing, your family will explode and die. Despite that being like a trivially easy task to complete, I feel like you'd be a little tense the whole week, up until the moment of completing that trivial task, right? And I think that games that give these heavy consequences can make you more immersed and engaged with them.
See, it's funny because I was going to make the opposite point. I was going to say that you don't actually need to punish the player that much to create a sense of engagement. And what I would say is, like, the example I'd do is actually from Katamari Damacy, because that's a game where the punishment for stuffing up in that game, like you run into something that's too big, is you lose a tiny bit of your Katamari. It's something, I don't know what it is, but it's a very small amount. And then you keep playing the game. The time limit is fairly generous. Not impossible to fail, but you're going to get there, I'd say, probably at least 80% of the time without failing. So it's a tiny punishment, but having those small, like very small bits of punishment, that's all you need to create an engaging experience.
I kind of think the Katamari falls into my example, right? You've got this very generous time limit, which you're probably not going to fail. But if you do fail it, you have to do the whole level again, which could be like 20-40 minutes of your time.
Well, at the end, sure, but early on it's like 3 or 4 minutes. I'm just worried that, one of the things I absolutely hated about The Lost Vikings, which is a game we covered in Season 1, is just how punishing death is and just how easy it is to slip up and die. And I think that the entire issue with that game is that it's so tense and awful because of how punishing failure is. And, I don't think Dark Souls is anywhere near as punishing as it appears at first. You and I have talked about this. It's very much a psychological thing. But if it was more punishing, I don't think it would be a better game for it. I think that the key thing is that you are vulnerable and get punished. Hell, Thief, you are vulnerable, but you quick save all the time. So when you get caught, you might lose 30 seconds of progress. That doesn't mean it's any less engaging. It still sucks to get caught.
Maybe the best middle ground is for something to be psychologically more threatening than it actually is.
Yeah, that's a really good way to put it. It has to feel bad.
Yeah, you have to feel threatened. You have to be afraid of things. But, it can't be too crushing, otherwise you don't want to play the game, right? Like The Lost Vikings, or I think some of my Pokemon runs have ended because I've died and I forgot to save for a long period of time. I think that stuff like that can, probably turn the player off even. So, yeah, feeling vulnerable makes a game more engaging. I think one of my most engaging moments over the past couple years is a game that I actually didn't play that much of because I don't think it was all that it was cracked up to be, which was Death Stranding, which was a very talked about game over the past couple of years for how strange it was. But there was it's got this stealth mechanic, right? And the first time I encountered the stealth mechanic has got to be one of the most engaging moments I've had playing a video game like ever, right? Because you're trying to hide from things you can't see. There are these ghosts around you, and they're trying to find you, and you can send out this ping, which will vaguely show you where they are. But if you do it, it kind of alerts them. So you have to really tensely crawl around. I don't know. It's so bizarre because you're trying to hide from. Unlike other stealth games, the shit you're hiding from just isn't on the screen. And once you got further into the game, you noticed that it was pretty hard for it to actually catch you. But that first time, man, it was so tense because there was that threat there, even though that threat in the end wasn't an actual threat to me.
I'm going to talk about DayZ again because DayZ is a game that I think captures this idea perfectly now that you brought that up. So DayZ, when it first started, for those who don't know, it's a first-person shooter survival game based on the Arma 2 engine, and there are zombies. And there are other players, and, you're very familiar with this by now, with human beings being the real threat. The other thing about this game is that at nighttime, the game went fucking pitch black. I had never seen darkness in a video game like this. If you were standing against the shore, you would see silhouettes of things, but otherwise it was you could not see anything. And when I first started playing, I had no idea what I was doing, and I was terrified of the zombies. Because the zombies would make moaning noises, and I would be lying prone in a warehouse watching them shuffle about, and I would be shitting myself hoping they didn't discover me. Once people had figured out that zombies couldn't actually catch up to you, everyone ignored the zombies. And what you would do is you would just run through everywhere, looting as you went, and you'd have 20 zombies chasing after you, and it wouldn't bother you in the slightest, because that's how you play the game. And it's all because of that psychological feel of vulnerability that made that experience so gripping and tense. But once you knew they weren't a threat and all the tension was released and you were just running around, they may as well have not been there. And the game started to become a lot more pedestrian.
Yeah, agreed. I think that this vulnerability really is just the key to making a lot of games feel a lot more fun and engaging. I'm not, also like you, not a big fan of these big power fantasies. Pat, we're getting closer to the end now. Did you have anything left to talk about?
No, that's about it. Hopefully you guys have enjoyed our rambling discussion about all of these ideas. I've enjoyed talking about it. Hope you've enjoyed listening. Before we wrap up, though, James, we should get into, I guess, our best and favorite games of the year. So I think let's keep this nice and simple. So tell me your favorite episode that we recorded this year, because sometimes we can record an episode where it's not our favorite game, but there's just lots of good discussion. I'll tell you my favorite episode, then you can tell me your favorite game that you played this year, and I'll tell you my favorite. So James, let's get started. What was your favorite episode to record this season?
My favorite episode to record was Archimedean Dynasty. This little game about being in a submarine stuck under the sea in a post-apocalyptic future was easily my favorite episode to record because we had a very long and winding discussion about the lore and the backstory of this game, and a really interesting discussion about the control scheme and getting good at using said control scheme. I think it's one of the least downloaded episodes in our roster, but it by far was the most fun for me to record with you.
I mean, it's not a surprise considering how obscure that game is, and this isn't me just crapping on you like I did with Mega Man Battle Network, where literally every time I tell a person about this game, expecting they've got no idea what they're talking about, they're like, "Yeah, I love that game." And I'm like, how do people know that Archimedean Dynasty is literally a weird MS-DOS game? So I'd say that's why. But I agree with you. It was a lot of fun to discuss, particularly the story. Very strong world building, and the manual that was attached to the game was actually quite a bit of fun to read.
Yeah, for you, favorite episode to record?
So for me, my favorite episodes are always the ones where we end up in disagreement with one another, I gotta say, because while it is always pleasant when we happen to somehow feel the same about a video game, at the end of the day, what I enjoy about this podcast is getting into a discussion and argument about video games. I like the opposing opinions. So I've got to say, my favorite episode that we recorded was definitely the System Shock one, where we had Nick on from Salt City Games. It was just really fun playing a game that I had, wanted to play for so long. One of the grandfathers of the immersive sim, and then to see the sharp contrast in our opinions, because by no means do I think System Shock is a flawless experience. In fact, I have a hard time recommending it to anyone who's not already enthused about environmental sims. But seeing all the history of the genre, like from a historical perspective, was awesome. And getting to argue about the validity of the UI was definitely a highlight for me, because I think that UI has more going for it than what most people would say.
Yeah, definitely. Although I will say, I think that absolutely nobody on this planet should go back and play System Shock.
Basically, if you've played Deus Ex, if you've played System Shock 2, if you've played Prey, I think there's something in here for you. But you have to know what you're getting in for.
Very rough around the edges. Even Pat won't disagree on that.
I agree with that. Very rough.
All right, so moving on to my favorite game that we played this year. In some ways, it's quite disappointing for me that the game that I enjoyed playing the most was the first one we played this year. That being, of course, Katamari Damacy. But oh boy, did I have a lot of fun in the short-lived, joyous experience that it was. I don't think it's a game I'd play again, because I think that the joy is kind of a fleeting one that you can never get back once you've done it once. But it's definitely something I think everybody should check out. It's very colourful and friendly, and the tone's oh so weird, but goddamn, does it deliver an extremely unique experience that is, wondrous from start to finish.
Completely agree. Katamari Damacy is wonderful, and I think it's It's funny, I'm looking at the episode now and there's rainbows popping out from either side of the king. And honestly, that's you and I, James, because we were both so positive about the game.
That's easily the most positive we've both been together on an episode. It was weird.
I remember I was speaking to a listener and they were like, yeah, so I've listened to a few of your episodes, and my favourite one is the Katamari Damacy one, because you were both so happy. Whereas normally we're miserable and grumpy and critical, and Katamari is just like, yeah, the game is just really fun, and we had a good time. What? Games are meant to be fun and enjoyable? How strange.
Game played with a controller, by the way.
Yes. Oh, yeah. If ever you play this game, do not change the controls. You got to play with the classic controls that feel weird. Because
it feels weird to get used to, but it will make perfect. A lot of sense to, yeah.
I'm going to cheat for my game of the year, James.
You can't pick Dark Souls.
No. Sorry. Dark Souls is automatically excluded. No, I'm going to cheat by picking two games. I'm sorry. I pick Thief 2 and Luna and Chrysalis. No. I pick Thief 2 and Splinter Cell and the reason I'm cheating is that I can't choose between the two. I think when it comes down to it, Thief 2 is a game that I enjoyed the most overall. But the game that surprised me the most was absolutely Splinter Cell.
Splinter Cell 1 was also my runner-up for second most enjoyed game of the year, by the way. So I also quite enjoyed it.
Splinter Cell basically... I didn't know this going in, but the more I played Splinter Cell, the more I could see that it was that it had Thief DNA running in its veins. Like, the game really takes more from Thief than any other stealth game I've played. And it's weird because it's set in like the modern day and you have guns and you have night vision goggles, but it really feels like they took the Thief formula of sneaking around in shadows and getting rid of lights and incapacitating guards one by one, and then it brought it to a linear focus. Like instead of having a big sprawling mansion where you have to go through every room and it takes 3 hours to play, it just puts you in a series of corridors and rooms with mini challenges along the way. So overall, the thing is, I just like that open level design of Thief 2, but man, I cannot deny that Splinter Cell was a really tight, enjoyable stealth package. So yeah, both fantastic games and both ones I love dearly.
Metal Gear Solid 3 is a bit more linear than Thief. It's I don't think it's quite as linear as Splinter Cell, but it's close, right?
Yeah, Metal Gear Solid 3, once again, I feel it's almost got taken a unique path. Like, Metal Gear Solid 3 is my favorite of all of the Metal Gear Solid games, but its use of camouflage as the way to hide, I guess, is how I really identify that game, which is a really cool idea, but in practice led to you switching camouflage, micromanage. You micromanage. The experience of playing that game is, I crawl in a bush, quickly open up the menu, put on my camouflage. Now I'm leaning against a brick wall because I've got up. Now I need to switch. And you know
what that game needed? A camo wheel.
Well, what Metal Gear Solid 4 does is it gives you the adaptive camo. So it basically
does it for you.
It gets rid of that. It just says, you can just always be camouflaged. And I mean, at the end of the day, that system is just, and that kind of micro menu management is less interesting than hiding in shadows. So I gotta give it to Splinter Cell.
Yeah, great game, and like you, I think it was a lot better than I thought it was going to be going into it. So I am very excited to play more of the Splinter Cell series going forward. So I guess that leads us to what we're playing next week, right, Patrick? Because, we're going to kick off 2021 in full swing, and we're actually going to start playing some games again. We've had a few weeks off now. It's been very nice to get some R&R, to be quite honest, but I'm very happy to be jumping right back into the show for the new year.
And we will, but first I need to plug the show, James. So my name is Patrick Arthur, and I've been joined by James Turlings. We both host the Retrospectives podcast each and every fortnight, except for our Game of the Year wrap-ups. We play a classic game of the past from start to finish. So we'll be looking forward to doing that, moving into the new year and moving into Season 3. You can find all of our content on our website, which is rspodcast.net. We've got all of our episodes there, including many, many articles that both James and I have written. You can read my article about DayZ. You can read my article about Thief. You know, gotta plug my own articles for my own podcast, and this is the best place to do it. Most importantly, James's and I's social media presence is probably pretty limited. I'm in charge of social media and I'm rather poor at it. But the one thing that I am proud to have done, and the one thing that I love doing more than anything else, is pushing and engaging with our Discord community. I like that on Discord we can actually have extended arguments and discussions with nuance, as opposed to the clickbaity, hot take, short, minor sentence statements that you see on things like Twitter that just irritate me and make me angry and make me close the app down. So we would love if you would come and join our Discord server, whether it be to give us feedback on the show, a video game, or if you just want to start an argument with me about Dark Souls 2, fight me anytime.
Get in the cage, lads.
Get in the cage. So with the plugging out of the way, please do come join us. You're all welcome. What game are we playing for next fortnight?
Okay, well, we're going to kick off Season 3 in 2021 with a bang. I am picking a game in a genre we haven't really done yet. I guess we've done real-time strategies, but we haven't done really like 4X style games yet, have we, Pat? So, actually, I guess Heroes of Might and Magic 3
is not 4X.
It's not.
It's
similar.
You'd call it turn-based strategy, but it's definitely a cousin of the genre.
Yeah, so we're going to kick things off with Civilization 4. I am actually quite a big Civ fan. I've played the hell out of 5 and 6, but I actually haven't played any of the older titles, so I kind of was a bit nervous to go all the way back to something like Civ 1, so I think we're going to play it a bit safer and start with 4, which came out, just bang on the dot in around 2005, although we're going to cheat and play with the expansions.
Yeah, so I've played Civ 4, although I'm a bit vague on it. I played a lot more of a game called Civilization Call to Power, which was kind of like a weird Civ knockoff, and it had some bits of 4, but I can't really... I've only got vague memories of it, and I've played shitloads of Civ 5 with the expansions, haven't ever touched Civ 6. So I've got a pretty scattered Civ history, but I'm at least... familiar with the basic strategy that you need to employ. I'm excited to give Civ 4 Beyond the Sword a try because I hear that it's got much more of a military focus, and I gotta say, I get really sick and tired of the warmongering penalties in Civ 5, so I'm ready to raise some cities.
Well, I mean, the good thing about the Civilization games for me was always that they kind of embodied the perfect real-time strategy, which was you just get to sit there and play base building for like 4 hours and then you're done.
Well, I remember the way I used to play Civ Call to Power is I'd build like 2 or 3 cities. I would build an archer in each of them, and then I would build buildings.
That's
and
it.
I'd do that for hours. I'd be like, yep, I'm going to have I'd build wonders. Like, each of my city would have like 7 wonders, and I'm like, yep, I'm going to win this game. You just keep building wonders. That's how you win.
Yeah, it's like the way we played Dawn of War, but like more fun.
But yeah, I'm eager to give it a crack.
Well, I'm excited for that too, so we'll see you in 2 weeks, guys, for Civilization 4.
Adios, friends.